All right, for more, let's speak now with Clayton Allen, a director of the United States with the Eurasia Group. Clayton, thank you very much for joining us. I just want to start with your thoughts on Trump's selection of JD Vance as his running mate. What's his calculation behind this decision, and how will this affect the election?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Trump's calculus here is pretty straightforward. Vance is the closest ideological match to him out of the list of potential candidates. Vance is also someone who has shown in recent years, although not for all recent years, a degree of fealty and loyalty to Trump that are certainly appealing to a man who prizes that in his vice presidential nominee. Trump's bet here, or Trump's expectation, is that Vance amplifies his populist message, helps appeal to his base, and that Vance brings an appeal in specific swing states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, the upper Midwest, where Trump is going to have to participate and compete very hard.
Well, Clayton, Trump started the day with a massive legal boost after a Florida judge threw out the classified documents case against him. We know an appeal is likely, but is there any chance now of the case going to trial before the election itself?
No, this case is not going to go to trial before the election. That was probably true before as well. This is certainly a setback for the government's prosecution efforts. The appeal now will likely go to the Supreme Court, which will have to decide about the appropriateness of the appointment of the special counsel who initially brought the charges. I think that the general expectation is that this Supreme Court, which has shown a preference for restriction of administrative authority and a preference for congressional direction, factor in this judge's decision to throw out the trial, probably would be generally favorably disposed towards Judge Kanan's argument. Though, of course, we can't make a prediction about what the Supreme Court would do.
And Clayton, we've been hearing a call for calm and unity from both sides of the political aisle now, and some softening of political messages and also taking down of ads, et cetera. But do you think it will last beyond at least the conventions?
So I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I don't think it will. You're absolutely right. We've seen some very, very well-argued calls and very powerful calls for unity and healing in the wake of this attack from Republicans and Democrats. House Speaker Mike Johnson, President Biden in his Oval Office address. At the same time, though, you've seen messages which amplify the antagonistic nature of our politics, that amplify the partisan division. None may be more relevant than that from JD Vance, who was one of the first people to come out after the attack saying that this was the result of Democratic messaging, that this was the Democrats' fault, instead of calling for immediate unity. Now, Vance is obviously now Trump's vice presidential pick. That in some ways means that that message is now part of the Trump campaigns or the Trump-Vance campaigns message around this. I think that suggests the direction of travel. Ultimately, what I think we see after a period of a few days of messages about unity is, again, retreat to each side's partisan corners.
Clayton, I want to ask you about Donald Trump specifically. We know that various reports say he's in high spirits, but I'm curious, do you see any signs of how the assassination attempt may have affected him personally? I mean, we're hearing things like, we know Nikki Haley, for example, has been invited to speak. Trump changing his speech, that he's due to give Thursday night, and he's saying things like, I'm supposed to be dead. So is it at all possible he's contemplating his own mortality in ways that could perhaps further define the entire presidential race, you think?
I think anything is possible. I think, though, that you have to look at this through the lens of a man who is absolutely a master politician. I don't want to discount Trump's personal revelations and responses to what was a traumatic event. But if you parse the things that we've just laid out, inviting Nikki Haley to speak at the convention, I think, was more a political maneuver. Remember, late last week, she released her delegates to vote for Trump. Of course, she had to do that mechanically, but doing so sort of brought her back into the camp. And bringing her to the convention, inviting her to speak, is very clearly an effort by Trump and the Republican Party to appeal to her voters who still remain somewhat skeptical of President Trump's candidacy. Rewriting his speech, I think, certainly there will be aspects of it that are changed, but it's also beneficial for Trump to highlight that he is responding to this event. It keeps it in the news. Certainly his address will focus not exclusively, but heavily on the events of this weekend, because they do paint a picture of him as now this Lazarus-like candidate, as well as drawing a pretty powerful distinction to President Biden. Trump's fist in the air photograph contrasted to Biden's age.
And Clayton, before the assassination attempt, I mean, just less than a week ago, the whole focus of the conversation was on Biden's age and whether he should step aside. But with that discussion now sort of overshadowed by this very shooting incident, I mean, does this change anything for President Biden? Could this serve as a distraction for him, or might this further weaken his position?
I think what this does is actually somewhat solidify Biden's position in the Democratic Party. The issue for Biden was that there was never a critical mass of senior Democrats who were calling on him publicly to step down. There were individual members, yes, but it wasn't party leadership. It wasn't his leadership in Congress. With this story now dominating headlines, I think it's unlikely that we reach that critical mass of Democrats. And that means that Biden is increasingly likely to stay in the race. We actually dropped our odds that he removes himself from the race from 35% down to 20% this morning.
Clayton, this race has had at least two defining moments. Obviously, the first debate was one, the assassination attempt is the other, and there could yet be more from the RNC ongoing and the DNC. But some observers are saying, look, the net impact of this all is that undecided or ambivalent Americans who don't follow politics are now paying attention. Now, is this better for Donald Trump or Joe Biden?
So this is better for Trump right now. Trump appears to be the stronger candidate. His base of support has been solidified. Republicans who were maybe a little bit on the fence about voting for him, who maybe were swayed by arguments that he was a threat to democracy, are maybe now a little bit more in support of him, a little bit stronger and more motivated in the wake of this attack. Now, that might not last. We still have 3.5 months to go. You could certainly see the tenor of this race change. However, as things stand, Trump is very clearly the favorite candidate. We personally view 75% odds that he wins this election.
And a full one-on-one interview of President Biden's NBC interview expected to be aired later in the day. We know some of the excerpt has been released so far, but what must he say to flip the script?
To flip the script, I think, is probably impossible in this one-off interview. This is an interview that's taking place in the midst of a heavily pro-Republican media cycle. Trump surviving an assassination attempt, naming his vice presidential candidate, being officially nominated, and kicking off a week of nonstop Republican messaging at the RNC is not the time that President Biden can really come out and deliver a powerful message that changes the entire dynamic of the race. That said, he can prevent additional damage. He needs to be forceful in his responses, strong in his delivery, and he needs to demonstrate to voters the type of candidate that we saw at the State of the Union, more so than the candidate that we saw at the debate.
Clayton, we leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts. Clayton Allen is Director, United States, with the Eurasia Group.